So much for coming. I'm Alana McGrattan, and I'm president of the New Mexico chapter of the National New Deal Preservation Association. And if you want to know more about that, there's brochures in the back, and we have a great website I'd like to bring your attention to. We're following a formula of fireside chats, which were very popular under FDR and the New Deal. And I'm going to have Kathy Flynn, who was our executive director, give a little background to make the segue on why we invited Rob Martinez, our state historian, to do a presentation of his Spanish New Mexican music. So Kathy, take it over.
The New Deal was a good deal. It put people to work, and the things that they did helped us then, and it's still helping us today. Many of you probably went to a WPA school, or maybe some of your family members were in one of the different programs. There were all kinds of different programs. The CCC was the first thing that Roosevelt created, and that was called the Civilian Conservation Corps. And guess what our new president did the first thing? President Biden created a new CCC, the Climate Control Corps. And our boys back in the 30s planted millions, if not billions, of trees, and I worry that maybe some of them are the ones that are going down now. But the CCC was the first program, and it put many young boys to work, and most of them are all gone now, but I've met with various ones over the years, and they felt like it was one of the major things that happened in their lives. They got paid $1 a day, and they got to keep $5, and the rest of them, the 25, went back to the families to help feed them. And the boys told me, and at 90, they still like to be called the boys, they would say, oh, it was a wonderful experience. It was the first time I didn't have to sleep in a bed with my other brothers and sisters, and I had 3 meals a day, and my shoes didn't have holes in them, and then there were all the things that they got to experience as a result, and we have received in return. The biggest program was the Work Progress Administration, the WPA. And those two programs are the ones that most people that remember the WPA or had a family member that you remember talking about it. But the WPA had subgroups, and one of them was the Federal Music Project. Another one was the Federal Art Project, the Federal Writers Project. And those were the 3 biggies, but there was so much that was created, and what we're going to talk about and share with you and have Rob Martinez share with you is the wonderful project that happened in New Mexico, totally different from any other state in the Union. The person who was in charge of the Federal Music Project was a symphony conductor back east. And he said, okay, we're gonna make sure that we get through with this. Every state will have a symphony. So he started checking around, and indeed, New Mexico already had a symphony in Albuquerque, way back then. So they hired a woman named Helen Chandler Ryan to be the administrator of the Federal Music Project, and they had to come up with what they were going to do. And what did they do? There was all of this beautiful Spanish-American music that had never been written down in musical form. The musicians had learned how to play the songs ear to ear, coming up from Mexico, Spain, wherever, but it had never been put in musical form. And so they hired the musicians. They hired a whole lot of musicians all over the state that played Spanish music and had them play the music while all the other musicians here in New Mexico sat down with them and wrote what they were playing. And as an end result, they got the creation of this music book, so that this music had never been put in this form. And then they had the Federal Writers Project do all the people in the Federal Writers to put all the text together. And then they got the federal art people to do the illustrations throughout the book. So man, it was a big thing to cover New Mexico in such a way. And no other state was doing it. We were the only ones. But as an end result, I went, that's a pretty good idea. And I understand that some, maybe 2 or 3 others did something. But New Mexico was the leader. New Mexico took care of our musicians that had not had the opportunity to have all of this exposure and coming forth with something. We had we received a copy of the original. We have reprinted it, and you have it available for sale out in the entryway there. So if you know somebody, if you're a musician, get it. And if you're not, you know somebody, get it. If you know 2 or 3, get it. There are other books out there, and I would just point out that this one will take you all over New Mexico and tell you what's in every town, whether it's the school you went to, of which plenty of them were in Santa Fe, or the courthouse that you went and got your marriage license at, or whatever else you went. And then there were a lot of artists that did things in those public buildings, and in post offices. But a lot of people don't notice public art in federal buildings. But now we hope you will when you go and look. But let's stick with the music today. This is very special for us to have our state historian, Rob Martinez, who, he's supposed to know about history, so he's probably got some good stories to share. But he's got even better stories, because he has like 12 generations of his family that were musicians that were doing that. And so we are delighted to have him. We feel honored, and we know we're going to enjoy it. So thank you, Rob, for agreeing, and go for it.
Hay que laureles tan verdes, que rosas tan encendidas. Si piensas abandonarme, mejor quítame la vida. Alza los ojos a verme, si no estás comprometida. Eres maldad de que vives en el capullo. Ay, qué tristeza me da cuando te llenas de orgullo de ver a mi corazón enredado con el tuyo. Ay, desmada despedida, chiquita por tus quereres. La perdición de los hombres son las benditas mujeres. Aquí se acaban cantando los versos de los laureles. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm Robert Martinez. I'm the state historian of New Mexico, and it's a real honor to be here to talk to you about our music here in New Mexico, our Hispano, Hispanic music. I will be singing some songs, telling some stories, but as a historian, I have to give you some context, okay? So this is the lesson. The first New Mexicans are the Puebloan people. We keep finding out they've been here longer than we thought. We thought it was about 10,000 or 15,000 years. Now we're finding out about 23,000 years. I keep reading online, yeah, but they were also immigrants. Yeah, but they still beat everyone else by about 22,000 years. So they're here first. There's other native groups coming in 1400s and 1500s, the Navajo, Dene people, Apache people, Comanche, and from the north, the Ute, the Kiowa, so all these different peoples mixing. And then in the 1500s, Spanish exploration and colonization. 1598, Juan de Oñate. We say Spanish, but it was a mix of people. European, Mexican, Indian, African. African history begins in 1539 when Estebanico comes with Fray Marcos de Niza, and he's the first official Spanish representative to the Pueblos in 1539. An African. Imagine that. So we're part of the Spanish Empire, until about 1821. There's an interruption there when we have our first revolution in North America in 1680, the Pueblo Revolt. They'd had enough of my Spanish ancestors imposing Spanish religion, political systems, and economic systems, and they kicked us out. But by that time, we were mestizos. We were part Indian, Native American as well. Over the years, though, these cultures and bloodlines and peoples are blending. It's terrifying, beautiful. There's love, there's hate, there's violence, there's tenderness, and all the while there's music. We know that Franciscan priests brought guitars and trumpets and violins in the 1620s to use music to evangelize the Pueblos. Can you imagine that? And the people were singing their songs, the romancero tradition from Spain. This is the folk music of Spain brought by the folk people, the peasant immigrants. Those are our ancestors. So that music blends and evolves as Mexican culture begins. People say Mexican culture didn't begin until 1821. No, it begins in 1519, when Cortez and his men land on the Mexican coast, and then they start having babies with Native American women, and the culture starts to blend and simmer and boil and cook, and the music is doing this too. So we're Mexican officially starting in 1821 for 25 years, and then we become a territory of the United States, and that changes us even more. People from back east coming to New Mexico, bringing their bloodlines, their cultures, their songs, their music. And we musicians, we don't care about flags and borders. If we like it, we take it, and we use it, and we blend it, and we mix it in, and we borrow and take. That's the good thing about music. Well, one of the many good things. I'm going to start with a song. It's not even a song, it's more of like a prayer. The Hermanos Penitentes are a lay group of men from northern New Mexico. They're Penitente Brotherhood. They're laymen, they're not priests, they're not monks, they are regular folk. This is our folk Catholicism that evolves over the centuries because we're far away from Rome, we're far away from Toledo, we're far away from Mexico City. So we have official Catholicism, and then we have our Catholicism that evolves here. So much so that when priests and governors come here under Spain and Mexico, they kind of freak out. Wow, what are these people doing? Well, we have alabados. That's an old Spanish word. And I'm going to chant. I used to say sing, but you have to chant these. And the hermanos chant these prayers. And they're done a cappella without instruments. And it's a communal prayer for everyone. And they tend to talk about the realities of life in New Mexico. Folks, it's always been hard here. It's always been dangerous. I always tell people, it doesn't matter where you come from. Africa, Native America, Spain, Mexico, England, Ireland, France, it doesn't matter. If you're going to come to New Mexico is going to put you to the test. But once you pass that test, bienvenidos, welcome. You're in New Mexico. Adiós acompañamiento, donde me estaban velando, ya se llegó la hora y tiempo de que me vayan sacando. Adiós mis amados padres, que conservaban mi vida, ya se llegó la hora y tiempo, ya se llegó mi partida. Que corazones no sienten tan solo en considerar que este paso tan amargo todos lo tienen que andar. La sepultura es mi cama, la tierra mi propio ser, se le atemoriza el alma de considerarme en él. Adiós todos mis parientes, toditos en general, encomienden mi alma a Dios, no me vayan a olvidar. It's an alabado, chanted by Penitente. It's saying goodbye to this world and to all our loved ones. It's the inevitability of death that we all have to face, and that's what it's saying. To me, that has the voices of all my ancestors in it. Spanish Catholic, Sephardic Jewish, Moorish Muslim, Mexican Indian, Genízaros, servants and slaves, marginalized in the 1700s, but still in us and with us, Puebloan, it's all of these things. I'm going to sing an alabanza. Alabanzas were songs everybody sang. They're usually about saints, and they were usually sung when you were working hard, sembrando, you're harvesting, it's hard work in New Mexico, men, women, and children. There were no labor laws back then. Everyone had to do their part. And in the census records of 1750 and 1790, I'm always fascinated, you'll see every once in a while someone listed as a musician. They must have been strumming a guitar, hitting a drum, playing a flute. And people would sing songs like this. San Isidro Labrador, he's one of our patron saints. He was a Spanish worker who worked on the Vargas family estate near Madrid in medieval times. His descendant reconquered New Mexico in 1692, Diego de Vargas. Well, he was a good man, he and his wife. And he fell asleep once, he was supposed to be working the field, and the story goes that an angel came and plowed the field for him. So he's one of our guys, okay? San Isidro Labrador, patrón de los labradores, liberta nuestro sembrado de vientos y de temblores. Liberate our work from wind, por el gran merecimiento, porque te adora el Señor. Liberta nuestro sembrado, San Isidro Labrador, por el sudor y trabajo, porque fuiste fatigado. San Isidro Labrador, liberta nuestro sembrado. I like this verse. It's asking for San Isidro to protect our hard work from thieves. El ladrón acostumbrado y sin temor al Señor, liberta nuestro ser. too. They're not just singing, they're praying. They're saying, please, San Isidro, protect our work, protect our harvest, protect our food from thieves and from bad weather. And wind. Been having a lot of that here. Out of that romancero tradition from Spain over the centuries, local musical forms blended with Native American rhythms and melodies and themes, and a unique local music is created. In Mexico, they're called corridos, ballads. In New Mexico, they're called Inditas. It just means little Indian girl. We don't know why. I like to think it's because they were cute and danced, and they just said, let's call these songs Inditas. Probably because they had that blending, okay, of Spanish and Mexican music with Puebloan and Genízaro. I'm going to sing one now. It's about a guy named Manuel Maes. These are real people. And he was a cibolero, buffalo hunter out of Las Vegas. He went hunting out in the llanos with all of the men. And they would ride their horses, who were trained to move when they would lance a buffalo, a huge animal, and it would fall over, and you didn't want your horse or you to get crushed. This pobrecito, this poor guy, something went wrong. He was lanced. His horse took a wrong turn. You can hear the lament of a young man losing his life in New Mexico in the mid-1800s. Caballo a la santo estado, que tú la muerte me diste. Caballo a la santo estado, que tú la muerte me diste. Me vi tan fatigado, desamparado y tan triste. Me vi tan fatigado, desamparado y tan triste. Caballo prieto mentado, que tú la muerte me diste. Caballo prieto mentado, que tú la muerte me diste. Tu cuerpo quedó bañado, con mi sangre te diste. Tu cuerpo quedó bañado, con mi sangre te diste. Adiós todos los parajes que en el camino encontré. Adiós todos los parajes que en el camino encontré. Adiós Madre Donaciana y Padre Juan de Diosmes. Adiós mis padres queridos, no me verán otra vez. He just said goodbye to his parents, never to see them again. This might be the saddest verse. He says goodbye to his woman. Adiós mi novia querida, ay qué bonita te ves. Adiós mi novia querida, ay qué bonita te ves. Adiós hermanos y hermanas, no me verán otra vez. Adiós parientes queridos, del finado Manuel Mes. Del finado Manuel Mes. Muchas gracias. As mentioned before, this is folk music, music of the people. There was no formal education. Everything was passed on orally from generation to generation. So these are stories that talk about life in New Mexico. These songs sometimes have about 34 verses. I'm giving you just a little taste. In that song, Manuel Maes laments one of his friends, Salvador Tapia. He says, "Why did you leave me to die by the river? Why did you leave me alone in the llano and the plains? Why did you leave me, my friend, who I thought was my friend, Salvador Tapia?" I did my genealogy, and on my mom's side, we descend from Salvador Tapia. It doesn't come across too good in that song. I'm going to do another Indita. This is a subcategory of Inditas called cautivas, captives. And it's in the feminine because these are from a woman's perspective. Cautiva culture was a big deal in the 1700s. This was a very dangerous place to live for everyone. Native Americans made captives of other Native Americans. Those captives were made captives to the Hispanic people. Hispanics would grab Native Americans. Native Americans would grab Hispanics. They would raid towns. Then the Hispanics would raid a year later looking for the women and children, sometimes finding them, sometimes not. Sometimes finding the woman who had a little baby by an Indian, bringing them back and raising them in a Hispanic household. Putting the cautivo, little inditos, into the households of the Hispanics and raising them the best they could as Hispanic Catholics. And these folks were marginalized. They're the Genízaro people. There's a lady named Plácida Romero out near Cubero, out near Grants, Cubero, and La Cebolla, and some Apaches raided her town. And she sings this song. And in the chorus, she says goodbye to her daughters, never to see them again. It's actually kind of a peppy song for the theme. El día de San Lorenzo fue un día muy poderoso, que me llevaron cautiva y mataron a mi esposo. El año de 81, cerca de las 10 del día, así sería, yo pienso, cuando esto no sucedía, que mataron a mi esposo y al nombre Jesús María. Adiós, ya me voy a padecer. Adiós, mis queridas hijas, cuando les volverá a ver. Adiós, rancho de cebolla, porque te muestras esquiva. Los palos, las piedras lloran de verme salir cautiva. Adiós, cubero afamado, se te acabó el valiente. Quizás no tenía parque, hoy te ha faltado la gente. Adiós, ya me voy a padecer. Adiós, mis queridas hijas, cuando les volverá a ver. Plácida Romero. Oh, it ends it pretty well for her. I don't know about that, but she was taken cautiva by Apaches and taken to Mexico. And then she ultimately found her way back home. Now, her husband had been killed, but her daughters, I guess, were still okay, and she lived out her life in New Mexico. I tried changing it to a guy's perspective, because I'm singing from a woman's perspective, but it just doesn't work. You gotta have that woman's voice in there. You got to have it, you know. Clovis composed a really cool indita about the coming together of all these people, the Spanish, the Puebloan, the Genízaros, the Comanches. And it's called Himno del Pueblo de las Montañas de la Sangre de Cristo. Can you remember that? Contaron sus querencias y hermosas indias llorenas. Ea, 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 ah. Aquellas indias hermosas, virtuosas, llenas de gracia, escogieron para esposas donde salió linda raza. Ea, 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 ah. Raza hizo, mezcla del indio del pueblo, donde salió un hechizaro, ea, 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 ah. Con sus cantos penetrantes y sus cuadros espirituales, alaba la santa tierra, que para todos es la madre, ea, 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 ah. Ya se oye en los campos aquel canto, aquella danza, retumbaba en la montaña, que sangre de Cristo llamaba, ea, 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 ah. Comiendo elotes tostados que la tierra producía, machucando carne seca, recibo lo que había, ea, 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 ah. Himno del pueblo, thank you. So this is the kind of music you would have been hearing in these mountain towns and in the plains and in the southern part of New Mexico. We're very isolated, and yet we weren't. We were connected to Mexico and Nueva España to the south with the Camino Real and the Chihuahua Trail, and then we were connected to back east by the Santa Fe Trail. So on the one hand, we were isolated, we're our own unique thing, yes. On the other, we were connected. We were connected to other parts of the world and influenced. We start to get music into New Mexico from Mexico. When we get out of that Mexican period into the territorial period. And a lot of our violin music that we hear, that we call colonial music, is actually from the Mexican period. Your charis, your chortis, some of that's even Scottish and Irish. It's music we don't even know sometimes. It might be Irish musicians coming here, French influence from Mexico, German in Mexico. People think German in Mexico, the Mennonites. Yeah, there's a lot of German influence in Mexican culture and music. So, I'm going to sing now some music from Mexico. I'm going to sing a corrido written by my father, Roberto Martinez. He wrote Mexican ballads about New Mexico. He wrote about the courthouse raid at Tierra Maria in 1967, his corrido de Rio Arriba. He heard about what happened. He was friends with Reyes Lopez Tijerina, so he wrote that corrido. So they say, the story goes, my dad was an opportunist. I think he wrote that the day he was arrested. And then they caught him a few days later and took him to the prison, the jail yard or whatever. And they say when they walked him in handcuffs, my dad's corrido was playing over the speakers. But I'm going to sing the first corrido my dad wrote in 1966. It's about a guy named Daniel Fernandez from Los Lunas. He was a Hispano, Nuevo Mexicano, Mexican-American who went to Vietnam and died for his country. So my dad did this to honor Daniel Fernandez, but also to give recognition to all the Hispanic New Mexicans who have fought for and died for this country, starting in the 1850s. My own great-great-grandfather on my dad's side, Felipe Lobato, was in the Union Army. I was told he was a general. It turns out he was a private volunteer. That's how family stories are, right? He also fought in the Indian Wars. I have his papers. So there's all kinds of history in our history. But this is about Daniel Fernandez, written by my father. Amigos, vengo a cantarles el corrido de un paisano. Se llama Daniel Fernandez, hijo nuevo mexicano. Este soldado valiente, valiente de nuestro estado, por el amor a su patria, la vida vida fue terminada, murió en batalla mortal, ahora se encuentra con Dios en su reino celestial. En el pueblo de los lunas fue el lugar donde nació, y en el sur de Vietnam fue el lugar donde murió. Era grande de estatura y grande de corazón, y a su patria querida le sirvió con devoción. Nuevo México querido, no des el brazo a torcer, tiene soldados valientes que cumplen con su deber. Dijo este gran soldado cuando se vio malherido: Virgencita milagrosa, no más un favor te pido, dame un momento de vida para rezarte un rosario. Después, madrecita mía, contento me voy contigo. Ya con esto me despido, paseándome en estos valles. Aquí se acaba el corrido del gran soldado Fernández. Thank you. Muchas gracias. My father, my late father, Roberto Martinez, was recognized by the Smithsonian as a corrido writer. And he and my brother Lorenzo were given the National Endowment for the Arts National Heritage Fellow Award for doing New Mexico music. They did that in 2003. I got to go play with them in Washington, D.C. So that was a lot of fun. And today's my dad's birthday. He would have been 93. Let's sing him Las Mañanitas and for you, okay? Bendita hasta la mañana en que vengo a saludarte. Venimos todos con gusto y placer a felicitarte. El día que tú naciste, nacieron todas las flores. La fila del bautismo cantaron los ruiseñores. Ya viene amaneciendo, ya la luz el día nos dio. Levántate de mañana, mira que ya amaneció. Quisiera ser un San Juan, quisiera ser un San Pedro, pa' verte a saludar con la música del cielo. Volaron 4 palomas por toditas las ciudades. Hoy por ser día de tu santo, te deseamos felicidades. Con jazmines y flores, este día voy a adornar. Hoy por ser día de tu santo, te venimos a cantar. Ay, ay. Happy birthday, Dad. Well, as the world starts to get smaller or bigger, however you want to look at it, obviously there's influences coming from all directions. In the 20th century, we really start to hear Mexican music, especially musical forms like mariachi music, which starts in the 1800s in Jalisco, the state of Jalisco,
These are peasant farm worker musicians who wear their white cotton clothes, big hats to protect themselves from the sun, and the huaraches, their sandals, and they play their own unique music, which is a mix of European and native Mexican sounds. Also, there's influences from Africa as well, especially in Yucatan. Mexico is very multicultural too. Influences from Africa, from Spain and Portugal and France, and native Mexican. Well, that music starts to come up in the mid-20th century, and mariachi music starts to take root in New Mexico. Just like flamenco. We didn't have flamenco here before the 20th century, but it really catches on here, right? With Maria Benitez and all these different people bringing it to us New Mexicans. We know a good thing when we see it and hear it. So my dad was totally influenced by Mexican mariachi music. Growing up in Mora, he'd go see movies with Pedro Infante. He was like the Mexican Elvis, you know. And my dad used to say, I'm gonna do that. So he started playing music in the 50s with my mom's uncle, Jesse Ulibarri, and they played Mexican music in rough parts of Denver, playing for tips. And then when he came to Albuquerque, he played with local mariachis and then started his own group, Los Reyes Albuquerque. And they played for, 40 years or so. I played with them for about 20 years. And so this is now going to get personal. I'm going to start talking about my family, okay? But my family isn't that unique. We all have families who listen to music and love music. And even though we're Mexican New Mexicans, we were listening to everything, as you'll see. But right now I want to do a song that I think is quite indicative of being New Mexican. It's a story about a beautiful woman from Malaga, Spain. It's written by a Mexicano, a Mexican composer. And me, Roberto Martinez, I'm going to sing it for you. Qué bonitos ojos tienes debajo de esas dos cejas, debajo de esas dos cejas. Qué bonitos ojos tienes. Ellos me quieren mirar, pero si tú no los dejas, pero si tú no los dejas, ni siquiera parpadear. Ya salerosa, besar tus labios quisiera, besar tus labios quisiera, malagueña salerosa, y decirte niña hermosa. Yo te concedo razón, yo te concedo razón, si por pobre me desprecias. Yo te ofrezco riquezas, te ofrezco mi corazón, te ofrezco mi corazón, por cambio de mis pobrezas. Besar tus labios quisiera, besar tus labios quisiera, malagueña salerosa, y decirte niña hermosa. ¿Quieres vivir? Thank you. Thank you. Y'all doing okay? You having a good time?
Where's your day job?
Not yet, man. There's a few who would like me to, but I'm not going anywhere yet. Okay, I'm going to break with the script right now because our New Mexico music, I hope you're taking away, that's not one thing. It's not just Spanish music. There's Spanish cultural influences there, most certainly. But they filter strongly through Mexico, and they're picking up a lot of different cultures, Native American, Mexican, African. They're coming up here, and we're blending up here. We have difficult relationships sometimes here in New Mexico, but we are all New Mexicans. Todos somos Nuevo Mexicanos. So, one of my favorite stories I like to tell, there's this young kid, tall and thin, skinny. I can relate to him, Big, thick glasses. He's from Lubbock, Texas. He made it cool to wear glasses and be a musician. He used to bring his group from Lubbock, the Crickets, and drive to Clovis, New Mexico, where they recorded most of their hits. Yeah. Can you imagine that? Well, I read that they would get in their car, drive as fast as they could, so that they could, when they got to Clovis, they could say, "We made it in 20 minutes," because of the time change. Buddy Holly, he influenced the Beatles, he helped create rock and roll, and I'd like to think that New Mexico therefore had a hand in creating rock and roll. Norm Petty Studios in Clovis, famous for Buddy Holly, but Roy Orbison recorded there, Waylon Jennings, a lot of those cool cats did. So this is in honor of Buddy Holly, okay? If you knew Peggy Sue, then you know why I feel blue without Peggy. My Peggy said to do, I really love you, girl. I want you, Peggy Sue. Peggy Sue, Peggy Sue, how I love and envy you. Oh, Peggy, my Peggy said to do, I really want you, girl. I love you, Peggy Sue. Peggy Sue, Peggy Sue, pretty, 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 pretty Peggy Sue. Oh, Peggy, my Peggy said to do, I really need you, girl. I want you, Peggy Sue. All right, let's dance. Peggy Sue, Peggy Sue, pretty, 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 pretty Peggy Sue. Oh, Peggy, my Peggy said I really love you, girl. I want you, Peggy Sue. Peggy Sue, Peggy Sue, with the love so rare and true. Oh, Peggy, my Peggy said I really need you, girl. I want you, Peggy Sue. I really need you, girl. I love you, Peggy Sue. There you go. Peggy Sue, Buddy Holly. All right. I'm going to do a song now. It's a children's song, but in the 60s it was very important to that 1960s civil rights period. It started out, I think it started out as a children's song, but it kind of became very symbolic of the civil rights movement, the Chicano civil rights movement, and you can sing it with me if you want. It's called De Colores. De colores, de colores se visten los campos en la primavera. De colores
gustan a mí, y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. Canta el gallo con el kiri, 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 kiri. La gallina con el cara, 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 cara. Los buñuelos con el pío, 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 pío. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. Muchas gracias. De colores. I got time for a couple more? Yeah. Okay. Growing up, I know that we were listening to Mexican music, northern New Mexico music. Obviously influences from East Coast, England, of course. My older siblings, they would listen to the Beatles, Simon and Garfunkel, Mamas and the Papas, Bob Dylan, Rolling Stones, all these groups. But we were also getting music from Cuba. Not Cuba, New Mexico. Cuba, the country, okay? And there was so much beautiful music. And the thing about music that I've always loved is it can take you to another place. Even if you never go to that place, you get a sense of what that place feels like. Whenever I hear the song Penny Lane by the Beatles, I'm like, wow, I know exactly what it's like to walk down that street in Liverpool. Because Paul McCartney, he told me all about it. Well, the same thing with this song. It's a beautiful, romantic song, but whenever I hear it, I feel like I'm on a beach in Cuba with palm trees, coconuts, rum. It's called Cuando Calienta el Sol. I grew up hearing this song. Amor, estoy solo aquí en la playa. Y es el sol que me acompaña y me quema, y me quema, y me quema. Cuando calienta el sol aquí en la playa, siento tu cuerpo vibrar cerca de mí. Es tu palpitar, es tu cara, es tu pelo, son tus besos, me estremezco. Cuando calienta el sol aquí en la playa, siento tu cuerpo vibrar cerca de mí. Es tu palpitar, tu locura, tu delirio, son tus besos, me estremezco. Cuando calienta el sol aquí en la playa, siento tu cuerpo vibrar cerca de mí. Es tu palpitar, es tu cara, es tu pelo, son tus besos, me estremezco. Cuando calienta el sol, cuando calienta el sol, cuando calienta el sol. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias.
You've been wonderful. I'm going to do one more. Again, I'm Rob Martinez, State Historian of New Mexico. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you. This is a nice fast one. You can clap, stomp your feet, do whatever you want. My dad used to call this the national anthem of New Mexico. Flor de las flores, flor de mi amor, vente conmigo y dame tu amor. Flor de las flores, flor de mi amor, vente conmigo y dame tu amor. Duerme, bien perdida, la dueña de mis amores, y ven, flor de las flores, ven a hacerme feliz. Ayer fui a tu casa y no te vi, quien me lo manda yo me dormí. Ayer fui a tu casa, tu mamá salió tu papá y me regañó. Duerme, bien perdida, la dueña de mis amores, y ven, flor de las flores, ven a hacerme feliz. Si te preguntan si te amo a ti, pronto contesta y diles que sí. Si te preguntan si te amo yo, pronto contesta y diles que no. Duerme, bien perdida, la dueña de mis amores, ven, flor de las flores, ven a hacerme feliz. Ay, ay. Thank you, muchas gracias. See you next time. Muchas gracias.